Are you listening?
Welcome to the Nerf Report. My name is Bryant. Thank you so much for joining us today. For today's episode, I wanted to take some time to compare my experiences that I've had with Google Stadia and the Nintendo Switch. Because while the two platforms obviously have their differences, they both really do offer similar experiences. And just for clarification, we will be comparing the original Nintendo Switch to Stadia and not the Switch Lite or the up-and-coming rumored Nintendo Switch Pro. And if this is your first time here, I want to point out, this isn't a video to prop up one side more than the other. I genuinely think the console war is one of the stupidest things I have ever heard of. And for credibility purposes, I have owned every Nintendo console from the NES to the Nintendo Switch. Well, excluding the Wii U, but if we're all being honest, that was the one console that we were allowed to skip. And when it comes to Google Stadia, I was a Stadia founder and have been using the service since the day it was launched. And I bring all of this up to bridge that divide and try to explain to you that I am trying to do this as unbiased as possible. Now, when comparing Stadia to the Switch, obviously there are some major differences. For one, Nintendo has a massive history of making great games, including the likes of Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong, Metroid, or even my personal favorite, Star Fox. And when it comes to the Nintendo Switch, we have already seen awesome games like Mario Kart, Animal Crossing New Horizon, various Pokemon games, Super Mario Odyssey, and Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And just to call this as fairly as possible, Stadia is barely a year old, whereas Nintendo is a 37-year-old company. You know, Nintendo clearly has a history of making great games, along with relationships with various developers to ensure that the best games come to that console. However, with Stadia, the argument has to be made. You know, games take time to make. And while that might be the case, we've already seen games like Outcasters, Submerged Hidden Depths, Orcs Must Die 3, Get Packed, Super Bomberman R Online, or even Guilt. Now, I think it's extremely apparent that Nintendo has a one-up on Stadia when it comes to exclusives, which, after 37 years of being a company, I would expect this. Now, on the topic of the overall experience, this is where things start to get really interesting. Because probably the largest feather in Stadia's cap is the 0 installs, 0 load times, 0 updates, and no hard drive to worry about. Whereas with the Nintendo Switch, you have 32 gigabytes of internal storage. And if you need more, well, you have to buy expandable memory cards, adding to the overall cost of the console. And with Stadia, this isn't an issue. I have over 100 games that I can access immediately. Because remember, Stadia has 0 installs, meaning that once you buy a game, you're playing within the matter of seconds. That is a major win for the platform. Now, on the topic of hardware, Stadia has a custom GPU capable of processing 10.7 teraflops, 16 gigabytes of RAM, unlimited cloud-based storage, along with the ability to play games at 4K and potentially 8K resolution. Whereas the Nintendo Switch has an NVIDIA custom Tegra processor capable of processing 1 teraflop, 32 gigabytes of internal storage, 4 gigabytes of RAM, along with the console being capable of playing games at 1080p on TV mode and 720p in handheld mode. And for me, this is where Stadia begins to take the lead. Because while the Nintendo Switch allows you to play in docked mode on TVs or in handheld mode, Google Stadia allows you to play on TVs, smartphones, tablets, PCs, or even a laptop. And from a mobility perspective, while the Switch does offer an all-in-one experience, with Google Stadia, if your phone or tablet has a 4K screen, you can essentially have a 4K gameplay experience using either the Google Claw or devices like the Razer Kishi. And on the topic of upgrades, well, Nintendo is rumored to be launching the Nintendo Switch Pro this year, which will hopefully bring 4K gameplay to the Switch. However, it should be noted that with Google Stadia, all of the upgrades happen on Google's end, and you aren't responsible for buying any new hardware. In fact, Stadia's John Justice recently told The Escapist that behind the scenes, Google is constantly upgrading hardware to improve Stadia's overall performance, giving you the equivalent of a mid-generation upgrade for free. Now, moving on to the Stadia and Switch Pro controllers, for me, they feel very similar. And outside of the different location of the joysticks, in my personal opinion, what can I say? They're both comfortable. However, when you compare the standard Joy-Con controller that comes out of the box with the Stadia controller, well, the Stadia controller is light years ahead of Nintendo. And the other thing to point out is the Stadia controller in many ways is your console. The controller connects to the Wi-Fi and communicates with Google servers exactly what you are doing. The controller also has unique features like Google Assistant, which will eventually allow you to use Google's AI to help open games, search for helpful videos, and much more. But again, just for clarification, one of Stadia's selling points is that you can really use any controller that you want. So while gaming on your PC, laptop, smartphone, or tablet, you could even use your Switch Pro controller or even your Joy-Cons. You can really use any controller that you want. And I guess the final thing to compare between these two platforms is cost. The Nintendo Switch is $299, whereas the Stadia Premier Edition, which is probably the closest experience to the Switch, is only $99. And from a controller perspective, both platforms' controllers cost $70. And if you're wanting that handheld experience using your smartphone, well, the Razer Kishi is only $79.99. So even if you were to buy the Premier Edition and the Razer Kishi, which would allow you to play on your TV at 4K, along with have a handheld mode, you're still saving $120 compared to the Nintendo Switch. And even then, the premium edition of Stadia at $99 isn't really necessary. If you're going to game on PC or on your phone, you don't need it. Technically, Stadia as a platform is 100% free, which is massive. Google is essentially offering a console that is more powerful than the Nintendo Switch and has similar features that you can use on any controller for free. And another win for Stadia is that with Nintendo, if you want to game online with your friends, you have to pay for Nintendo Switch Online, which is $3.99 a month. Whereas with Stadia, you just have to buy the games you want to play and you can play with your friends. There is no additional cost. But again, a lot of this is just my personal opinion based on using both platforms, and I'm still trying to keep this as unbiased as possible. However, in many ways, Stadia has presented itself as an extremely valid alternative to the Nintendo Switch. Yes, Nintendo is home to thousands of games, with some of them being the greatest video games that have ever been made. But outside of exclusives, if you want to play third-party titles like Cyberpunk 2077, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, or even Watch Dogs Legion, games that currently cannot run on Nintendo, Stadia is an extremely valid alternative. And I guess where I want to end this is by hearing your personal experience. Have you tried out Nintendo or Stadia? What has your experience been? Did I miss any different features between the two platforms? Please let me know in the comment section down below. Hey, thanks again for checking out our channel. If you like what you saw and you want to see more content just like it, which who wouldn't, hit the subscribe button right there. And while you're down there, hit the like button. Maybe even consider becoming a Nerf Report best friend, just like the people listed down below did. In fact, don't you want to see your name there? I know I do.